Welcome to Bada Boom. I'm Chris. On this episode of the podcast, we have on Brian Buccellato, known for his iconic run on the New 52's Flash. Buccellato talks his latest book, Midlife, or How to Hero at 50, a story about a firefighter who discovers he has powers later in life, and the challenges that come with it. Buccellato also discusses Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong, a new crossover that sees the MonsterVerse clash with the DCU. Listen in and bada boom. Hey, what's up, Brian?
Howdy.
Thank you for coming on. I'm really excited, to talk to you as we're setting this up. You've been instrumental in terms of my comic book reading life. Like,
Oh
you've been a
no.
part of great. I
Uh,
remember when I first picked up that Flash and what that like changed and how it really got me to dive deep into that character in terms of my love. So great to have you on. So you're working on some really exciting series. You got a couple coming up. I know Midlife. You're working on No One. And the biggest one of this year, and I think people are really excited for this, is Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong. So let's talk about Midlife. What's that been like? I know it seems like a very personal story. So when did that come about, and how did you partner with Image for that?
when did it come about? I want to say maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I thought of the idea. Coming off of Aftershock and I doing Chicken Devil, which was slightly personal because it was just like an older guy, dealing with family and gets, Chicken Devil started with me asking myself, what would I do if, the Russian mob murdered my family? How would a guy like me get revenge? Somebody who
Yeah.
has no special skills when it comes to killing. So I liked approaching comics that way. It was sort of new for me, more personal, a little bit more of my personality of being like a little more irreverent, a little sillier,
Yeah.
and over the top in some stuff. So coming off of that, I wanted to do another book that was like in that vein, and so I decided to just lean into the personal. Like I had a daughter at 50. I have an adult son. I've got two daughters now, and just the idea of you know a superhero for my generation. Not somebody who has been a superhero and has kids and is later on in life. Somebody who's never been a superhero who decides or is compelled to become a hero while dealing with sort of life after 50. So that's sort of the genesis for midlife. And so I dove into it very quickly. Found an artist that Kyle Higgins turned me on to a while ago, Stefano Simeone, who's amazing. He's just an amazing artist, and we just clicked. And sent Eric Stevenson my pitch, and he was like, "Let's do it," and that was pretty much it.
That's awesome. And in terms of like where that story goes, like how long have you mapped it out? Is it something you see going as an ongoing, or you just really have this first story kind of mapped out and you'll see where it goes?
Well, I mean, the economics of the state of comics make things. There's no such thing as an ongoing. I don't think.
Yeah.
Traditionally, especially not, if you're not the big two, it's really, really hard to be an ongoing. This I'm treating as an ongoing. It's solicited as an ongoing. I would love for it to be an ongoing, but we'll have to see, if it's financially, feasible. I do have, I would say at least 18 issues mapped out. But I also I think one thing that's working with Aftershock and their sort of limited, way they do things with the volumes made me reimagine how you finish a volume. Whereas in the past, when I did Sons of the Devil or Cannibal, um, it was sort of like cliffhangery with the expectation of a next volume. I think
Yeah.
nowadays, like you do leave things to want them to go to the next volume, but I think you have to have a story that's closed enough so that if you can't get to the next volume, at least there's a satisfying or somewhat satisfying ending. So, that said, I hope to at least get two volumes out of it. Like that's probably would be what I would consider success.
Yeah. Is that difficult to strike that balance? Because there's so much, there's really like a almost like a bullet, like a point you have to hit to kind of narrow that. You have to keep people intrigued, but also like if you have fans of the book where it ends, you kind of have to put it in a place where they're not like, putting out fundraisers and stuff like that to be like, bring it back. So how difficult is that as a writer to kind of like strike that balance of, keeping people excited for what's next, but also having that reality of being like, okay, like I have to tell the story in a way where it's closed enough where it could be an ending.
Yeah, it's a challenge. 100% a challenge
Mm,
because I think we all think in terms of everyone wants the story to keep going, and unless you conceive of an idea that feels like it's a closed end, like graphic novel or movie or something that just feels like it lives within a space. A lot of times, when you're creating comic stuff, you want it to be ongoing. You want to carry these stories out. So it's definitely a challenge. It's all writing is a creative challenge to begin with, right? So it's just one more challenge that you have to find a really interesting way to solve that honors both the IP and the people that are reading it.
yeah, and then in terms of like bring up that challenge aspect, and you've worked with characters like a Flash that has very unique challenges in terms of one, their history, their power set, all that. And what was it like sort of bringing that experience, these stories that you've been telling now, which are, deeply personal?
Yeah, so for me, it's really just about like bringing everything from my past, all that wealth of information, knowledge, experience into what I'm doing next, right? Because what's the point of living life? What's the point of doing all these things if they don't inform your creative choices moving forward? So, getting to play with, Flash and Injustice and Detective Comics, and again now full circle big crossover book.
Yeah.
It all feeds into the same thing. So I'm really excited to do for people to see Midlife because it's sort of like a combination of the weirdness of Chicken Devil with superhero stuff.
Yeah, and again, these stories feel a lot more grounded and personal. And I know you have screenwriting experience. Have you thought about turning these things into screenplays, or have any of these ideas maybe has started as screenplays and then became comic books?
Well, Chicken Devil started out as a I wrote like a half-hour pilot just like during I think it was COVID or it was somewhere around that time. I just had this idea and I wrote it really fast. And my reps at the time were like, you know, this isn't like the other stuff that you do, and
Mm,
it's a half hour. And so they did not want to send it out. They didn't want
mm,
me to use in
yeah.
any respect because it was unlike what their vision of me was, which spoiler, I'm not with those reps anymore because you know I
Well,
don't
yeah,
think
I
they
mean,
got me.
yeah,
Whatever.
I mean, you wrote it. It is you. I think
Yeah,
that's always tough
yeah.
when you're kind of put into those box. But sorry for cutting you off. But
Oh no, it's not a cutoff.
yeah,
It was a
yeah,
conversation, man.
yeah.
Yeah. So I had this idea that I really liked, and I really liked the pilot. And
Mm,
so when there was an opportunity, I was talking to Mike Martz. We had been wanting to do something together for a while. Mike Martz at the time was at Aftershock, and so I was like, well, I have this idea, and it's not a comic. It's right now it's just this half-hour pilot, but I think it's really cool. And so there was a case where it went from being this little pilot that I wrote to being, now 2 volumes of a comic. But I think in general, you can't be a creative person and live in a world where you're trying to do, movies and television and comics and not want that stuff to cross over because you
mm,
just, when you have an idea and you create something that chances are if you're going to move forward with it, it means you love it, you're excited about it, you're passionate about it. So I think you want to see it in multiple formats, right? I don't think you do a comic book because I want to create an IP and then have that IP be the other thing. But you'd be lying to yourself if you didn't think oh man, there's a possibility, or wouldn't it be great if? So I think all writing is done, at least in my experience, with like one thought of how great would it be if.
yeah, and speaking of that, what was it like to watch the Flash movie if you've seen it? I think there's obviously like some little nods, like especially when it came to the Dark Flash, it really reminded me of what you guys did with Reverse Flash in terms of that design. So what was it like if you saw it? What did you
I did
think?
see it. I did see
Yeah.
it. I thought it was an uneven but at times very fun movie. I think when
Mm,
it was good, it was very good. When it was bad, it was terrible.
mm,
I feel like it was a mixed bag.
yeah.
I think that I was more forgiving of it than some of my peers that I've
Mm,
talked to about it. But for me, and this is not no slight to any of the
yeah.
creative people involved, but like that was never my vision of Barry Allen,
Yeah.
even from the other Snyderverse movies.
Yeah.
Like I felt like they were trying to do the MCU Spider-Man, their version of that with Flash, and that's just never who he was with me. Like to me, like Barry Allen was more buttoned up and awkward, but like in like a studious, like smart way.
Yeah.
Like they made him kind of a doofus, and so that was. that was a little hard for me just because I was so excited to see Flash in the DC universe, and then when he was that iteration, I was like, I mean, is that Wally West? Who? What version is
Yeah.
that? Like I don't know. But that said, in the movie, I like the fact that the older Flash was much smarter than the one that we saw in the Snyder films.
Yeah.
And they're playing against each other, so he did a great job of acting against himself. But I had mixed feelings, let's say.
Yeah. I think same way, as a fan of DC and stuff, I think obviously the moments with Nora were really strong, and when it hit its sparks, it hit its sparks. But I think, especially watching it again now that it's been on Max, I'm like, man, like
Sure.
those effects are really weird, man. I think sometimes
Yeah.
it takes you out of the experience.
I mean,
But yeah,
allegedly, it was a stylistic choice. You
uh,
know.
I
You
think in
know.
some cases you could see that, but like I was like, I don't know,
Mm,
especially
I feel no, but I feel like they were not able to do what they wanted to do, so they pulled it way back and called it style. It's like with comic artists or any kind of artist, like your flaws are your style.
yeah.
Like if you're an artist who can't draw feet, like, oh, that's your style. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you're an artist that draws like 7 biceps
Mm.
on arms, that's your style. It's usually born out of inability to actually recreate the world as you see it in some way.
Yeah.
But that's my 2 cents.
No, it's fair, especially when it comes to that film. But like I said, it had those great moments, and it was cool to see some little nods to
Sure.
some real iconic things and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Uh, but,
absolutely. The
but
design was definitely Francis's design for
yeah,
Slash. I mean, let's
yeah.
to me that was the only thing that came from our run.
And then I think speaking on that artist thing, like what's it been like working on Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong? I think the great thing about comic books is you can actually fulfill a lot of that. I think that's something that would be impossible to shoot, impossible to write in a film form. So what's it been like going back and forth, seeing what you're writing come to life in that regard?
It's fairly amazing. Like
Yeah.
it's hard to put into words because like any comic book script, like there are words on the page until an artist turns it into brings it to life. So like I think almost any comic book writer would tell you that like whenever you get new pages in your inbox, it's like Christmas. Like you're opening up a gift and you're like, oh wow, like
Yeah.
because you see it in your head a certain way, an artist is going to bring what they bring to the table, and then the marriage of the two, like usually you're just like, wow, like so it's seeing like Godzilla and the Justice League and all these characters come to life and interacting, and then there's a one level of wow when you see the line art because Christian is I mean he's a phenomenal artist and like he brings such a like emotion to the characters' faces, but he can still do the big monster actions. The guy is super diverse, and like there's one level of wow when the line art comes in. Then there's another level when colors come in and like the sunsets and the this and like I feel very fortunate. Let's just say it's a great experience to be on this side of things.
Yeah, and in terms of like writing it, like what can fans expect with it? Like, is there anything you can tease in terms of like what brings this all to a head?
Like spoilers, I can't really do much more than what's
Mhm.
out there already. I mean, I will say that there's multiple monsters from the legendary universe, so it's not just Kong and Godzilla. I can probably safely say that the monsters come into the Prime Earth, so it's on Justice League's terms. I think the preview just came out for issue 2, where you see Superman facing off against Godzilla. So like that, they have a big battle early on, and part of my justification for that is that Godzilla is all about the established order and like keeping like nature in order. So when Godzilla comes to Prime Earth, there's all these metas that sort of upset the balance in the mind of Godzilla. And so if Godzilla was going to go after one meta to be the alpha, who are they going to go? Who is he going to go after? Superman.
Super.
So that pretty much sets up like their big early battle.
That's awesome. I think especially like now that I'm thinking about it, I was thinking about the big things, fire breath and stuff, and that's a really interesting story beat that I think as much as it's used throughout the history, especially with Godzilla versus Kong. I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that they would be pretty upset with a world filled with smaller versions of basically the monsters and stuff.
Right. Godzilla's king of all monsters, or king of the monsters, I think is what the technical. I think I feel like the old original Godzilla was Godzilla king of all monsters, or that
Mm.
just maybe in my head. The movie that came out recently was King of the Monsters. Anyway.
Yeah, it might be like a Streisand effect thing, and then also like there's so many movies that come out
Right.
now, and you're like, wait, I think it was that one. Like, I
Yeah.
always confuse because they came out so close to each other. I kind of confuse Godzilla King of Monsters and Godzilla versus Kong. There's like scenes that like blur
Right.
in my mind because they look so similar in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And I'm
Sure.
like, "Oh, wait, did that happen in this one?" The only one that, like, sticks out to me is, like, Kong Skull Island, which I think is the best of all of them, so that's the only
So
one
good.
that's, like I've seen that movie way too many times, especially on Blu-ray, so that one for sure I know is one. The other ones kinda blend together.
Yeah, so I really like that one.
Mm,
I also liked Godzilla versus Kong. I think that was like the fight scenes were awesome. I feel like they did Kong justice,
mm,
even though he is obviously overmatched.
yeah.
You know,
No, I thought it
I
was
think they
all
did him justice.
that movie alone, like the part that made all like the dumb human stuff worth it is when Kong like his shoulders out of place and he like snaps it into a building. I was like, this is why I'm here for this movie. I was like, the other stuff I could do, these movies have gotten ridiculous with the human parts, but that alone,
But
that
the
visual look was like, all right, great.
but the ending too, like with the axe and
Mm,
the way he comes flying in and gets supercharged, like they really hooked up the end action sequence.
yeah.
I'm actually working on a legendary a graphic novel, a Kong graphic novel that's between Godzilla versus Kong and the new uh, Godzilla Kong movie
Oh, that's awesome.
that's coming out next year. So I saw a cut of that, and there's some really cool stuff that's coming down the pipe for that. I can't say anything about it, obviously, but
No, of
um,
course. The
there's some really
teaser I
cool stuff
saw, I
coming.
was like, "Is that a chimpanzee? Like, what are you what are we gonna see in the orangutan?" So I'm sure you saw some awesome stuff, and we'll be able to fill in some of the gaps with the story and stuff. But I
Yeah.
actually really like Adam Wingard movies. You know what I mean? Like The
Oh
Guest is
yeah,
one of my favorite.
I guess.
I've seen that movie way too many times as well.
What, what if Captain America was a homeless automaniac? Yeah,
Yeah. RIP Lance
yeah.
Reddick. That's what anytime someone's like brings up Lance Reddick, obviously The Wire, but I always bring up The
Uh,
Guest. I'm like,
sure,
that's but yeah, I'm really excited for
100%.
that. And that world is been is really good. I think some of the movies are uneven, but like when it shows like the flat out like fighting and stuff like that, that's when those shine.
Yeah, yeah. The human stuff is the least interesting thing about those movies.
No, and some of the dumbest, you're like, this is more unbelievable than than all these monsters going at it. Some of the you're like, why are they
Yeah.
doing that?
As I've gotten older, though, like I forgive movies more than I used to.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm kinder to movies nowadays than I was in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah, yeah. You also, I mean, obviously as a creative, like how hard, how difficult even the worst ones are. And then also too, like I think now I see a lot of things through the eyes of my son. So I'm like, oh, he's
Sure,
having a good
sure,
time. So why am
sure.
I being grumpy or
Yeah.
seeing it this way or seeing it that way?
Fans often bring their own headcanon to the table, and so that's why they're like geek fans, quote unquote, or genre fans are like the
Yeah.
most passionate, but they're also the most judgmental because I think
Yeah.
there's like a sense of propriety to any comic book or Star Trek or Doctor Who or Star Wars. Anything with like a big fandom or that traces back to your childhood. Like there's a sense of ownership, and so when things don't go the way you think they should, fans really react negatively to that. And I think just getting older is that you learn to let go of that stuff. I think more than you would. I had the fortune to have a horror script that I wrote to get produced in 2022. I think it's out on like Paramount now. But like
Mm,
I wrote the script, but then I know all the things it took to make that movie. I know like the budget. I know the
mm,
the actors and
yeah.
the shooting schedule and this and that. And like so on some level, like you know how hard it is to make any movie, let alone a really good movie. So like I think that also gives you another perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right when it comes to that headcanon stuff. And also, like, again, when it comes to getting older, you worry about other stuff like bills and stuff like that. So you're like, why? Like, and then I was like, Ahsoka just came out, and then a friend of mine was asking me what I thought, and I was like, man, I really don't care like I used to. I noticed that. I was like, there's so much that comes out these days, and like, great, we won as geeks and stuff like that, but it's just like, well, if I don't like it in 6 months, there'll be another one or something, or in 6 months, there'll be something that erases
Yeah,
it. So, like, why get so passionate and stuff? But then you get like things that are really good, like, seeing Blue Beetle with my son. My son
I
is,
haven't seen it yet. I
oh,
definitely
so
want to
good.
see it.
So good. As my son is Mexican, I'm Puerto Rican and Colombian. So to see that and have that
I'm
moment,
half
and
Puerto Rican. All right.
oh yeah, yeah. It's directed by a Puerto Rican. It has all those things, and kind of, growing up with George Lopez, and then, seeing him have a good time. It was really good, and it reminded me why these things are so important and stuff. So it's always good to have that. But then again, when it's bad, I'm just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that I tell anybody is that like one thing doesn't cancel out another. Like
Yeah.
the comics exist. Your favorite version of Batman, whatever 7 million actors have played him, it still exists. Like one doesn't, you can have all the things, and if you don't like one version of it, you just don't worry about it. Don't pay attention to it because there's going to be another version. Maybe you like that one better, maybe you like it worse, but there's going to be another version. But when you write IP characters, like you're not going to please everybody. Like I used to have a guy who like would tweet me and tell me how I ruined Flash forever for him. Like, thanks for ruining all my childhood characters. I'm like, okay, you know. But then on the flip side, yeah, I'll have someone who comes up to me and is like, yeah, I really loved your Flash when I was a kid. I'm like, that's cool, but now you make me feel even older because you were a kid when that came out.
Yeah, and especially like, obviously you have a lot of experience with that because, when you guys were writing, the Flash, that was the new 52. The Rogues were completely different,
Yep.
especially with Francis's style. Like, what was so crazy about that was just seeing some of the panels that, he was able to bring out and really bring out those designs. Like, yeah, like, hey, like, I'm sure maybe you like all these characters with guns, but this actually makes more sense. And
Yeah, I mean, it upset people. It did
yeah.
upset people. I mean, Francis's art. I'm not his art because he's
Mhm.
an amazing artist. Like
Mm,
I love, and the way he sort of throughout his career, like now he does the whole thing together with the colors and
yeah,
he's a masterful artist.
yeah,
And back then, like we were given some mandates. We were told that we had to do things like give the rogues powers. Like that came from above.
yeah.
So we tried to do the best version of that we could. And then first chance that Jeff had, he took it back. He's forever evil.
Well, funny enough, like you said, no matter what happens, someone's going to change it, or, those versions still exist. You can still go back and read Mark Wade's, over a
Yep.
hundred issues, and those movies still exist that you could go back to. So it's like, and then, you're going to see the flip side of it in 10 years when there's kids that grew up on it. You know what I mean? It's like the
Well, that's the whole
prequels.
thing. Yeah. I mean, like a case in point, when we were doing our Flash, which is Barry Allen, like there were so many people who were Wally West fans who hated everything we did. And like, oh, it's boring. Nothing happens. He's got no personality, and this and that. It's because they were Wally West fans and they were mad because it wasn't Wally West. And then over a decade later, there's people who are like our version of Flash is their Flash, so they don't even have that connect. The people of that time aren't connected to Wally West in the way that the people who were mad at us when we were doing Barry were, because that was their Flash. You know what I mean? But both
Yeah.
things can be true.
No, for sure. Like I said, with the prequels, like now, like there's people who are excited to see Hayden back, despite, when those movies came out, he was the worst actor to ever live. And now,
Yeah,
he's
for sure.
giving, Emmy worthy performances in Obi-Wan. So I think,
Yeah,
like, you live long enough to see both sides in the cycle, and you can recognize it
yeah,
when it's like, hey, are we really being truthful and honest? And the real critic is time. You know what I mean? How these
yeah,
things last throughout, how people look back on them. They remember how maybe that thing may have not been perfect, but it came to them at the right time. So it's
yeah.
it's
Nothing's
interesting.
perfect.
Yeah.
Nothing's perfect, man. Like you can look back at art that you thought was great when you were a kid. When I was a kid, I remember when Paul Smith took over the X-Men. I hated it. I was like, he sucks. Actually, I was at a convention when this had to be like, 1985, 84, some whatever. I don't remember when Paul Smith took over the X-Men
Mm.
from Dave Cockrum, who like Paul Smith's a great artist, but I told the editors of Marvel at the time, who had like this little panel,
Mm.
like, why did you choose him? He sucks. You know, I hated his art, and then now I look at it, I was like, it's masterful. He was so good, like the Wolverine Silver Samurai. Like he was such a good artist, and as a kid, I didn't see it.
No, and now you're on panels where they're like, "Why did you do that to the Rogues?" And then you're just like, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that. It came back to me."
Yeah. Well, no. Well, now
yeah.
I'm way in the distance. It's 10 years later. Now I have like, oh, I loved it. I loved what you did.
Yeah,
I've,
especially.
I've come over that hill.
Yeah, you've lived both sides of it. But thanks again, Brian. It's been awesome. Again, thank you for taking the time out. I know you're super busy, got a lot of work and projects coming up. Thank you for coming on. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And with that,
I appreciate
boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Bada Boom Podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at Bada Boom Podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.